In the penthouse of the Obsidian, technology is supposed to keep you safe. Smart air filtration, automated locks, and a $20,000 security system that monitors every breath. For 30-year-old software engineer Jax, it was his fortress of solitude. But tonight, the fortress has a leak. An odorless, colorless, and tasteless killer is flooding the vents, carbon monoxide. The smart sensors have malfunctioned, and Jax is drifting into a sleep he will never wake from. His heart rate is slowing, his oxygen is dropping, and the silence is becoming lethal. The silent alarm, the stray who sensed the invisible. Chapter 1: The Fortress of Glass. The Obsidian was more than a building, it was a vertical monument to human achievement, a 60-story needle of carbon fiber and reinforced glass piercing the smog of the city. Inside its walls, the chaotic world of the streets was filtered out by a series of high-end mechanical lungs. Residents paid a premium for the pure air experience, trusting a network of lithium-powered sensors to manage the very breath they took. Jax, a 30-year-old software architect, lived on the 40th floor in a world of absolute digital certainty. His penthouse was a masterpiece of automation, where the lights adjusted to his circadian rhythm and the air was scrubbed of pollutants every 10 minutes. He lived in a fortress of glass, believing that because he could monitor his home from a smartphone, he was immune to the hazards of the physical world. The city outside was a blurred bokeh of neon and iron, but inside the Obsidian, the atmosphere was sterile and silent. Jax sat at a workstation that cost more than a mid-sized car, surrounded by 3 glowing monitors that cast a cool, blue light over his face. He felt untouchable, protected by a $20,000 security system that promised to detect everything from a glass break to a change in humidity. But that smart grid of the building was hiding a lethal flaw. Deep in the sub-basement, a high-pressure boiler had developed a hairline fracture in its exhaust manifold. Instead of venting out the chimney, a heavy, colorless vapor began to seep into the central vac shaft. It was a failure of steel and maintenance, a physical glitch that the digital software wasn't programmed to interpret as a threat. Carbon monoxide, that silent killer, began its slow, invisible climb up the skyscraper. It didn't trigger the smoke detectors because there was no smoke. It didn't trigger the chemical sensors because they had been calibrated to look for natural gas leaks, not the byproduct of a faulty furnace. The gas moved through the vents like a ghost, rising through the 40th floor without making a sound. Jax noticed a slight pressure in his temples, but he dismissed it as Zoom fatigue. He had been coding for 12 hours straight, and a headache was a standard occupational hazard. He didn't realize that his blood was already beginning to change, the CO molecules binding to his hemoglobin 200 times faster than oxygen. He was being suffocated by the very air he had paid $5,000 a month to breathe. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, his eyes feeling heavy and dry. "I'll just close my eyes for a minute," he whispered to the empty room. He didn't know that a minute in a CO-saturated room is a one-way trip to a coma. As his chin dropped to his chest, the smart home lights dimmed automatically to rest mode, assisting the very process that was killing him. The monitors continued to glow, displaying lines of code that would never be finished. The air filtration system hummed along, recycling the poison with efficient precision. In the fortress of glass, the technology was working perfectly according to its programming. It was facilitating a quiet, high-tech death, and there wasn't a single human in the building who knew the 40th floor was a tomb. Chapter 2: The Invisible Fog. Carbon monoxide is the perfect assassin because it bypasses every biological warning system a human possesses. It doesn't make you cough, it doesn't sting your eyes, it doesn't have the rotten egg smell of a gas leak. It simply enters the lungs and tricks the body into thinking it is still breathing. It is a chemical lie that puts the brain into a state of blissful, terminal relaxation. As Jax drifted deeper into the fog, his heart rate began to plummet. His brain, starving for real oxygen, started to shut down non-essential systems. First went his peripheral vision, then his sense of touch, and finally, his awareness of time. He was entering stage 2 CO poisoning, where the muscles become heavy and the will to move evaporates. He was literally falling asleep into a grave made of luxury furniture. That smart sensor on the wall remained a reassuring green. The software had hit a logic loop, Because the temperature hadn't risen and there were no particulates in the air, the AI concluded that the environment was safe. It was a fatal gap in the programming. The machine couldn't imagine a danger that didn't fit into its preset categories. The technology was blind to the invisible. Outside, the temperature had dropped to a freezing 20 degrees. The wind whipped around the glass corners of the Obsidian, creating a low, mournful whistle. This wind was actually pushing the gas harder through the vents, creating a backpressure effect that flooded Jax's penthouse at twice the normal rate. The concentration of CO was now at 400 parts per million, lethal within the hour. Jax's breathing became shallow and ragged, a sound known as Cheney-Stokes respiration. It is the sound of a body trying to find oxygen where there is none. His skin began to take on a faint, cherry-red tint, a classic, gruesome sign of carbon monoxide poisoning. He was no longer a software engineer, he was a biological system in the process of a total hard drive failure. In his dreams, Jax felt like he was floating in a warm ocean. He felt no pain, no fear, and no urgency. This is why the silent killer is so effective. It removes the victim's ability to care about their own survival. He was seconds away from a permanent system shutdown, his fingers twitching once on the keyboard before going still. The high-rise was a tomb of high-definition screens and silent vents. Thousands of people lived in the surrounding towers, but none could see through the reflective glass of the 40th floor. To the world, Jax was just another light in the skyline. To the building's AI, he was a user in sleep mode. The isolation of the digital age had become a physical barrier to his rescue. But while the digital sensors were failing, a biological sensor was approaching. On the narrow, windswept ledge of the 40th floor, a white shape moved through the shadows. It was a creature that lived in the gaps of the city, a stray that didn't rely on algorithms to tell him when the air was wrong. The silent alarm was about to go off, and it didn't need a battery. Chapter 3: The Sentinel of the Ledge. Ghost was a battle-scarred alley cat who had survived 7 winters in the concrete canyons. He was a shadow of the Obsidian, a creature that the building's $20,000 security cameras were programmed to ignore as background noise. He had no collar, no microchip, and no home, but he had a routine. Every night at 3 a.m., he visited the 40th floor fire escape for a scrap of tuna. Jax had started feeding the stray months ago, an act of quiet kindness in a lonely city. He had even installed a pet flap in the heavy balcony door so Ghost could come in during storms. Ghost wasn't a pet, he was a partner. He viewed Jax as a tall one who provided resources, and in the hierarchy of the wild, you protect your resources. As Ghost landed on the ledge, his whiskers, highly sensitive tactile organs, began to twitch. A cat's whiskers can detect changes in air pressure and density that are invisible to any human or machine. To Ghost, the air coming out of the penthouse vents didn't feel light. It felt heavier and too flat. It carried the metallic, acrid scent of a combustion failure. His pupils dilated until his eyes were 2 black voids. He looked through the glass and saw Jax slumped over the desk. Most cats would have simply moved to a different ledge, seeking fresher air. But Ghost felt the vibration of death in the room. He saw the irregular movement of Jax's chest and recognized it as the movement of a creature that was being hunted by an invisible predator. Ghost began to pace the ledge, his claws clicking against the frost-covered metal. He let out a low, guttural growl, a sound designed to carry through glass. He was testing the boundaries of the fortress. He knew the tall one wasn't sleeping, he was fading. The stray who had survived by being invisible was now desperate to be seen. The cat's biological sensors were reporting a system failure inside the room. Ghost could smell the ionized quality of the air as the CO displaced the oxygen. It was the smell of a forest fire before the flames arrive, a prehistoric warning that triggered a fight-or-flight response in his feline brain. He chose to fight for the man who had shared his salmon. He began to throw his 8-pound body against the double-pane glass. It was a futile gesture against the reinforced structure, like a moth hitting a lantern. But Ghost wasn't just acting on panic, he was looking for a weak point. He remembered the pet flap, a small door of plastic and magnets that was the only non-reinforced part of the skyscraper's skin. He dropped down to the base of the door, his fur standing on end as the wind tried to peel him off the ledge 400 feet above the street. He looked at the flap. Jax had locked it for the night to keep the drafts out. Ghost began to growl, a deep, rhythmic sound of aggression. He wasn't a stray anymore, he was a saboteur, ready to break the laws of physics to save his pack. Chapter 4: The Breach. Ghost began to tear at the plastic seal of the pet flap with a violence that ignored the pain in his paws. His claws, designed for catching mice, were now being used as pry bars against a magnetic latch. He shredded the weather stripping, his blood staining the white plastic as he forced his way into the gap. He was a 12-inch creature fighting against a 60-story building's security protocol. With a final, desperate shove, the mechanical latch sheared. The flap swung open with a violent clack, and a gust of freezing 20-degree air rushed into the penthouse. This was the first fresh air to enter the room in 3 hours. It created a vortex effect, momentarily swirling the CO away from the floor. Ghost squeezed through the opening, landing on the hardwood floor with a silent thud. Inside, the concentration of carbon monoxide was so high that Ghost felt a wave of nausea. A cat's metabolism is faster than a human's, meaning the poison would hit him twice as hard. He had maybe 5 minutes before his own muscles failed. He didn't waste time looking for the source of the gas, he went straight for the target. He leaped onto the $5,000 desk, his weight sending a stack of papers flying. He stared at Jax's pale, cherry-red face. He let out a screech, a high-frequency, ear-piercing sound that cats use only in life-or-death territorial battles. It was a sound designed to cut through the deepest sleep, a sonic boom in the middle of a silent tomb. Jax didn't move. His nervous system was too dampened by the CO to respond to sound. Ghost realized that noise wasn't enough. He needed to trigger a reflex action. He used his front paws to swat at Jax's face, his claws retracted at first, then extended as he realized the severity of the situation. He drew 3 thin lines of blood across Jax's cheek. The pain was a jolt to Jax's brain. A tiny spark of adrenaline flickered in his chest. His eyes twitched, but they didn't open. Ghost upped the ante. He lunged at Jax's forearm, sinking his teeth into the soft flesh of the wrist. This was the feline override, a localized, intense pain signal that the brain cannot ignore, even under the influence of a chemical depressant. Jax gasped, a sharp, ragged intake of air. His eyes flew open, but they were glazed and unfocused. He saw a white blur of fur and claws on his desk. His first instinct was confusion, then a slow, dragging realization that his head felt like it was in a vice. He looked at the smart sensor on the wall, it was still green. But his dogcat was bleeding, and his arm was screaming in pain. "Ghost!" Jax whispered, his voice a dry rasp. He tried to stand, but his legs were like jelly. He collapsed back into the chair, the room spinning in a dizzying carousel of blue monitor light. Ghost didn't stop. He leaped onto Jax's chest, his weight forcing another gasp of air. The cat was acting as a living pacemaker, his frantic energy forcing Jax to stay conscious. Chapter 5: The Violent Awakening. Move! Get up! Ghost's body language screamed the command. He leaped toward the balcony door, then back to Jax, repeating the movement in a frantic loop. Jax, his brain slowly processing the sensory input, finally smelled that heaviness Ghost had felt an hour ago. He realized the headache wasn't fatigue, it was the smell of that silent killer. He looked at the pet flap, seen the blood on the plastic, and understood. He tried to stand again, this time grabbing the edge of the desk for support. He knocked over his coffee mug, the sound of the ceramic shattering on the floor acting like another alarm clock. He began to crawl toward the balcony, his lungs burning as he tried to find a pocket of oxygen near the floor. Every inch was a struggle against the gravity of the gas. Ghost stayed at his side, his own breathing becoming labored. The cat was at the limit of his endurance, his movements becoming jerky and uncoordinated. He was donating his final minutes of consciousness to guide the man. He nipped at Jax's ankles, a persistent, annoying stimulus that kept Jax from drifting back into the blissful, terminal sleep. Jax reached the handle of the heavy balcony door. It was a high-security lock, requiring a thumbprint and a physical turn. In his state, his fingers felt like sausages. He pressed his thumb to the sensor, error. He tried again, his sweat blurring the glass, error. That smart building was now actively preventing his escape because it didn't recognize his distressed biology. Ghost leaped onto the handle, his weight adding to Jax's efforts. It was a scene of prehistoric struggle against a modern cage. Jax let out a guttural roar of frustration, his adrenaline finally overriding the company's lethargy. He smashed his fist against the manual override button, a low-tech backup that the architects had included for emergencies. With a hiss of depressurization, the seal broke. Jax threw his weight against the door, and it swung open into the 20-degree night. A blast of freezing, dirty, beautiful city air hit him in the face like a bucket of cold water. He collapsed onto the fire escape, his chest heaving as he sucked in the oxygen-rich wind. He was vomiting, his body purging the toxins, but he was alive. Ghost followed him out, collapsing onto the metal grate a few feet away. The cat was shaking, his white fur matted with soot and blood. He began to groom his paws with a frantic, obsessive rhythm, a feline way of processing a near-death experience. The Sentinel had completed his mission. He had broken into the skyscraper and broken the logic loop. Down in the street, the world continued to move. No one heard the struggle on the 40th floor. The Obsidian sensors were still green, the AI still reporting a perfect environment for its residents. But on the fire escape, a man and a stray cat were shivering in the dark, the only two beings in the tower who knew that the fortress of glass had become a gas chamber. Chapter 6: The Breath of the City. Jax fumbled for his phone in his pocket, his fingers finally working in the cold air. He dialed 911, his voice a broken whisper as he explained the situation. Carbon monoxide. 40th floor, the sensors are wrong. Within 5 minutes, the silence of the night was shattered by the rhythmic, screaming wail of sirens. That smart building was about to be invaded by the high-tech reality of the fire department. When the fire crews breached the penthouse, their handheld and multigas meters went into a red alert screen before they even crossed the threshold. 800 parts per million, the captain shouted through his oxygen mask. This guy shouldn't be breathing. How did he get out? They found the balcony door open and Jack slumped against the railing, his arm wrapped around a white cat. The building's management was in a state of panic. That smart grid had failed to detect a lethal concentration of gas that had affected 3 other floors, though fortunately, those residents had been woken by the sirens before their levels became terminal. The digital miracle of the Obsidian had been exposed as a high-priced lie. The only thing that had worked perfectly that night was a stray cat's whiskers. Jack spent 2 days in a hyperbaric chamber, his blood being scrubbed of the CO molecules. The doctors told him he was lucky, 10 more minutes in that chair and he would have suffered permanent brain damage or heart failure. They asked him how he managed to wake up. Jax didn't tell them about the feline override or the magnetic latch. He just told them he had a very persistent security system. When he was finally released, Jax didn't go back to the 40th floor. He terminated his lease and moved to a low-rise brownstone with windows that actually opened and a boiler he could see with his own eyes. But he didn't move alone. He carried a carrier with a white, one-eared cat inside. Ghost was no longer a stray, he was a resident with a lifetime supply of premium salmon. The Obsidian was forced to undergo a $10 million retrofit of its air monitoring systems, but for Jax, the lesson was already learned. We build our lives on data, we trust our safety to algorithms, and we believe that technology has tamed the world. But when the invisible killer comes, a smartphone is just a piece of glowing glass. You need something with a heartbeat to tell you when the air is wrong. Ghost sits on the windowsill of the new brownstone now, his notched ear twitching as he watches the city. He doesn't miss the 40th floor ledge, and he doesn't miss the pure air filtration. He likes the smell of the street, the exhaust, the rain, and the life. He knows that his whiskers are the best sensors in the world, and he knows that his tool one is finally listening. If Ghost's midnight breach reminded you that the best alarm system in the world doesn't have a plug, help us tell his story. Share this with the people who think they are untouchable in their digital fortresses. Because as long as the wind blows and the cats watch the skyline, there will always be a sentinel in the shadows, ready to wake us up before the silence becomes permanent. The city is smart, but a cat is wiser. If Ghost's courage moved your soul, help us honor the silent guardians of the skyline. Smash that like button to salute Ghost and every stray that watches over us when the sensors fail. Subscribe to Paws that saved lives, where we bring you the most thrilling and dramatic cinematic legends of nature's heroes. Comment Ghost below if you believe a cat's whiskers are better than any AI.